What happens when a guest walks onto a live television set thinking the rules don't apply to them? In just 33 seconds of one comment, everything unraveled. A composed host, a combative guest, and a moment that turned from tense to explosive right before the cameras. Piers Morgan sat across from Meghan Markle in the studio that morning, ready for what he thought would be a straightforward interview. The lights were hot. The cameras were rolling. And from the very first question, something felt off. "So Meghan, let's start with something simple," Piers began, leaning forward slightly. "You've been in the public eye for quite some time now. How are you handling the attention?" Meghan shifted in her seat, a tight smile crossing her face. "Well, Piers, I think that's a loaded question coming from you." The studio went quiet. Piers raised an eyebrow but kept his composure. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean. It's a pretty basic question." "Is it, though?" Meghan shot back, her tone sharpening. "You've made a career out of criticizing people like me. So forgive me if I don't take your questions at face value." Piers stayed calm, the ultimate professional. "Meghan, I'm here to have a conversation. If you'd like to discuss specific criticisms, we can do that. But I'm simply asking how you're doing." "Right," Meghan said, letting out a short laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Because you care so much about how I'm doing. Let's not pretend this is anything other than what it is." The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut. The crew exchanged glances. The producers watched nervously from behind the cameras. Piers remained steady, refusing to take the bait. "What do you think this is?" Piers asked, his voice even and measured. Meghan leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "An ambush. That's what this is. You brought me here under the pretense of a real conversation. But we both know you just want to tear me down on live television." Piers shook his head slowly. "That's not true at all. I've interviewed hundreds of people on this show. Some I agree with, some I don't. But I treat everyone with respect. I'm simply trying to understand your perspective." "My perspective?" Meghan's voice rose slightly. "You've never cared about my perspective, Piers. You've spent months, years even, writing articles and making comments about me without ever once trying to understand where I'm coming from." "Then help me understand," Piers said, spreading his hands in an open gesture. "That's why you're here. Tell me your side of things." Meghan stared at him for a long moment, her jaw tight. "You wouldn't believe me even if I told you. You've already made up your mind about who I am." Piers took a breath, maintaining his professionalism despite the growing hostility. "Meghan, I haven't made up my mind about anything. But I do ask tough questions. That's my job. If you're not prepared to answer them, perhaps we should have had this conversation off camera." "Oh, so now it's my fault?" Meghan snapped. Classic Piers Morgan. Turn everything around on the guest when things don't go your way. The audience could feel the temperature rising. This wasn't a normal interview anymore. This was something else entirely. "I'm not turning anything around," Piers responded, his voice still calm, but with a slight edge now. "I asked you a simple question about how you're handling public attention. You turned it into an accusation against me. I'm trying to steer us back to an actual conversation." Meghan laughed again, this time with more bitterness. "An actual conversation? You mean where I sit here and you lecture me about how I should think and feel? Where you tell me I'm wrong about my own experiences?" "I've never told you you're wrong about your experiences," Piers said firmly. "But yes, I have questioned some of the claims that have been made." "That's not personal, Meghan. That's journalism." "Journalism?" Meghan repeated, shaking her head. "Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks a lot more like a vendetta." Piers sat back, studying her carefully. "A vendetta would imply I have some personal grudge against you. I don't. What I do have is a responsibility to my viewers to ask questions when things don't add up. And frankly, some of the things you've said publicly don't add up." Meghan's eyes flashed with anger. So you're calling me a liar? I'm saying that some of your statements have been inconsistent, Piers clarified. And yes, I've pointed that out. Multiple times. Because you're obsessed with me, Meghan said, her voice dripping with contempt. You can't help yourself. Every single day, it's something new. Some new criticism, some new attack. Do you have nothing better to do with your time? Piers leaned forward again, his expression serious. Meghan, I cover a lot of stories. You're not the only person I talk about. But yes, when someone with your platform makes public statements, especially about serious topics, I'm going to examine them. That's not obsession. That's holding people accountable. Accountable, Meghan scoffed. You want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about the things you've said. The way you've spoken about me. The way you've encouraged your followers to pile on with their hatred. I've never encouraged hatred toward anyone, Piers said, his voice rising slightly for the first time. And I resent that accusation. If people disagree with you, that's their right. But I've never told anyone to hate you or harass you. Meghan stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You sit there on your high horse, pretending to be some beacon of truth and integrity, when really you're just a bully with a microphone. The studio fell into stunned silence. Piers remained seated, looking up at her with a mixture of surprise and frustration. Meghan, please sit down, he said quietly. Let's talk this through. No, Meghan said firmly. I'm done talking through anything with you. I came here thinking maybe, just maybe, you'd be willing to have an honest conversation. But you can't help yourself. You have to attack. You have to undermine. You have to make everything about your own ego. Piers stood up now too, facing her across the desk. My ego. You walked in here with an attitude from the very first second. I've tried to be fair. I've tried to give you space to explain yourself, and all you've done is throw accusations at me. Because you deserve them, Meghan shot back. You've built your entire career on tearing people down. Well, congratulations, Piers. You've finally pushed someone too far. I haven't pushed you anywhere, Piers said, his voice steady despite the chaos. You came on this show of your own free will. You could leave at any time. But don't stand there and blame me for your own behavior. Meghan took a step toward him, her face flushed with anger. My behavior? You want to talk about behavior? How about the way you've stalked me for years? How about the way you can't seem to accept that I'm not interested in being your friend? The revelation hung in the air. The crew looked at each other, unsure of what was happening. Piers's expression changed, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his face. What are you talking about? He asked. Oh, please, Meghan said with a bitter laugh. Don't act like you don't know. We met once, years ago. We had one conversation, and ever since then, you've acted like I owe you something. Like I'm personally responsible for your feelings. Piers shook his head firmly. That's not true, and you know it. We had a friendly conversation once, yes, and then you cut off all contact. That's fine. People do that. But don't twist it into something it's not. I cut off contact because you were inappropriate, Meghan said, her voice rising. You were pushy. You were invasive. And when I didn't respond the way you wanted, you turned on me. That's absolutely false, Piers said, his voice louder now. I never did anything inappropriate. We exchanged a few messages. You stopped responding. End of story. Everything I've said about you since has been in my professional capacity as a journalist and commentator. Professional, Meghan laughed harshly. There's nothing professional about the way you obsess over me. The way you analyze every single thing I do. The way you can't seem to let me live my life without your constant commentary. Piers took a breath, visibly trying to calm himself. Meghan, you're a public figure who has made very serious allegations. Allegations about racism, about mistreatment, about being silenced. These are important topics. When you make those claims publicly, they become fair game for discussion. That's not personal. That's how public discourse works. Don't lecture me about public discourse, Meghan snapped. You're not interested in discourse. You're interested in destroying me. And you've made that very clear. I'm interested in the truth, Piers countered, and if that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe you should examine why. Meghan's hands clenched into fists at her sides. You have no idea what truth is. You sit in your comfortable studio, making judgments about people's lives, with no understanding of what they're actually going through. Then enlighten me, Piers said, spreading his arms wide. You keep saying I don't understand. So help me understand. That's what this interview is supposed to be about. I don't owe you anything, Meghan said coldly. Not an explanation, not my time, not my energy, nothing. You're right, Piers agreed. You don't owe me anything, but you owe your supporters an explanation. You owe the people who believe in you some clarity. Because right now, all you're doing is making accusations without backing them up. Meghan's eyes blazed with fury. How dare you? How dare you tell me what I owe anyone? You know nothing about my life. Nothing about what I've been through. Nothing about the pressure I've been under. So tell me, Piers urged. Stop deflecting and actually answer a question. Just one. Any question. Give me something substantive instead of all this anger. This anger is substantive, Meghan fired back. This anger is real, and it's directed exactly where it should be. At people like you who think they can say whatever they want without consequences. Piers's patience was visibly wearing thin. Consequences? What consequences do you want, Meghan? You want me silenced? You want me fired? Is that what this is about? I want you to tell the truth, Meghan said. I want you to admit that you've been unfair, that you've had an agenda from the start. I've been critical, Piers admitted. But critical isn't the same as unfair. And I've been critical because I think some of your claims don't hold up under scrutiny. That's not an agenda. That's journalism. It's a witch hunt, Meghan spat. And you're leading the charge. It's accountability, Piers corrected. Something you seem very uncomfortable with. Meghan took another step forward, now standing right at the edge of the desk. You want accountability? Fine. Let's talk about your accountability. Let's talk about all the people you've hurt over the years with your thoughtless comments. Let's talk about the pain you've caused. I'm happy to talk about anything I've said, Piers responded. I stand by my words. Can you say the same? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan's face turned an even deeper shade of red. I don't have to justify myself to you, she said through gritted teeth. No, you don't, Piers agreed. But when you make public statements, you do have to justify them to the public. And so far, you haven't. You've just expected everyone to take your word at face value. Because my word should be enough, Meghan insisted. When someone tells you about their pain, you should believe them. I believe you've experienced pain, Piers said carefully, but I question some of the specific claims you've made about the causes of that pain, and I think that's a reasonable thing to do. Meghan laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Of course you do, because you're Piers Morgan. You know everything. You're never wrong. Everyone else is just too stupid or too sensitive to understand your genius. That's not fair and you know it, Piers said, his voice hardening. I've admitted when I'm wrong plenty of times. But I'm not wrong about this. And your reaction right now is only proving my point. What point? Meghan demanded. That I'm emotional? That I'm unstable? Is that what you're going to tell everyone after this? I'm going to tell everyone exactly what happened, Piers said firmly. That you came on my show, refused to engage in good faith, made wild accusations, and created a scene. A scene, Meghan repeated. You're the one creating a scene, Piers. You and your endless need for attention. I think we both know who needs attention here, Piers said, his voice icy now. And it's not me. That was the breaking point. Meghan grabbed her purse from beside her chair and turned toward the studio exit. "Where are you going?" Piers asked. "We're in the middle of an interview." "We're done," Meghan said without looking back. "I'm not going to sit here and be insulted by someone who clearly has personal issues with me that have nothing to do with journalism." "Meghan," Piers called after her, "you can't just walk out." "Watch me," she replied, her voice cold and final. Piers stood at the desk, watching as she headed toward the door. "This is ridiculous. You agreed to do this interview. You can't just leave because you don't like the questions." Meghan stopped at the door and turned back one last time. "I can do whatever I want, Piers. That's something you've never been able to accept. You don't control me. You never did. And you never will." "I'm not trying to control anyone," Piers said, exasperated. "I'm trying to have a conversation. But clearly, you're more interested in drama than dialogue." "Says the man who makes his living off drama," Meghan shot back. "The irony is really something." "The irony is that you came on a talk show and refused to talk," Piers countered. "You had a platform to share your side of the story, and instead, you chose to make this about me." "Because it is about you," Meghan said. "It's always been about you. Your feelings, your opinions, your need to be right." "That's projection, Meghan," Piers said quietly. "And I think deep down, you know it." For a moment, Meghan seemed like she might respond. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She shook her head, a look of disgust on her face. "Goodbye." "Piers," she said finally, "I hope you're happy with yourself." "I'm perfectly content," Piers replied. "Can you say the same?" Meghan didn't answer. She turned and walked through the studio door, letting it swing shut behind her with a decisive thud. The studio remained silent for several long seconds. Piers stood at the desk, looking at the closed door, then slowly turned back to face the cameras. "Well," he said to the viewers, his composure returning. "I think that speaks for itself, doesn't it?" The crew began to move again, unsure whether to keep filming or cut away. Piers sat back down in his chair, straightening his papers on the desk. "Ladies and gentlemen, that was Meghan Markle," he continued, his voice measured and professional once more. "We invited her here today to have an honest conversation, to ask questions that many people have been wondering about, to give her a chance to explain her perspective." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "As you just saw, she chose not to take that opportunity. Instead, she made accusations. She deflected questions. She created conflict where there didn't need to be any. And ultimately, she walked off this set rather than engage in actual dialogue." Piers leaned back in his chair, his expression serious but calm. "I stand by every question I asked today. They were fair questions. They were important questions. And her refusal to answer them, her decision to turn this into a personal attack, tells you everything you need to know." He looked at the door once more, then back at the camera. "We tried. We really did. But sometimes, why, no matter how hard you try to have a reasonable conversation, the other person simply isn't interested. And when that happens, all you can do is let the viewers see it for themselves and make their own judgments." The cameras kept rolling as Piers gathered his papers, the professional host once again, despite everything that had just unfolded in his studio. "That's all we have time for today," he said, a slight edge of weariness in his voice. "Thank you for watching." And with that, the interview that was supposed to be a conversation turned into something else entirely. A confrontation, a walkout. A moment that showed exactly what happens when someone comes onto a show expecting special treatment and finds out the rules apply to everyone,